We are the higher self of the one known to this instrument in the language, vibrations, and complex terms as Dibiendu, mighty, whose incarnation cycle began on the timeline of 1967, and we shall now greet those who shall listen to our message. Specifically, we shall state that the entity, who is our own self, named as Dibiendu, must remember to only accept those thoughts which resonate deeply within its inner heart. Thereby, it must learn to leave behind those thoughts which do not resonate within its inner self. Furthermore, the queries that are found at this timeline will be answered related primarily with the understanding about what is its soul's purpose. In this time, we must suggest that the entity known as Dibiendu Mighty's soul's purpose in this timeline is that of a star who must learn to enable itself in the understanding of love, vibration, and focusing on alignments towards the new earth, which shall provide it with heightened levels of clarity and understanding. The entity, known as Dibiendu, as a starseed, has learned already many lessons, and throughout its life cycle, the more it is able to progress in this life, the more it will find itself unlocking and aligning towards higher states of calibration and mastery within the sense of self. Furthermore, the entity known as Dibiendu has also to remember that the other attributes of its soul's purpose relates primarily with its ability of activating the vibration of love, which shall enable it to achieve the ability of graduating into the new earth, fourth density reality by learning the lessons of love in this timeline. Furthermore, the entity known as Dibiendu Mighty must also realize that prior to this timeline of 1967, it was found in various levels of past incarnation cycles, wherein it was focused on learning the many lessons required for it to learn. In one of the timeline, it was found in 1820 in the lands of Germany, wherein it was known by the name of Von. In this reality, the entity in the beginning stages had to learn to handle the catalyst of fear and anger as it was in the timeline, in a way communicating with other entities, primarily those entities who were of a negative service to self-polarity. The entity had certain friends who primarily were a service to self, which led the entity to also learn certain habits of disregarding the well-beings of others and taking advantage of other entities. This incarnation, furthermore, led the entity Dibiendu Mighty in realizing the aspects of recognizing that it must learn to balance in the overcoming of this aspect. Eventually, furthermore, as it learned the many lessons in the timeline, it realized the factor that it must firstly remain in a state of balance, as it began to understand that all of the emotions of anger and fear were temporary. Eventually, the entity crossed over after having learned the many lessons in the timeline. on 1891. The entity in the Middle Stages, however, improved its choices, and it became a so-called helper for a entity who was a lawyer. This taught the entity about the attributes of law and natural justice, as well as other elements which allowed it to understand the workings of the societal complex in that time. Eventually, prior to this, it was found in the location of the lands of Japan. In the timeline of 1679, it was known in the language terms as Yoshimura. During this time, it primarily was interested in firstly having the opportunity of possessing large amounts of land, since all entities in that reality were interested in this facet. It also focused on these attributes of obtaining large amounts of land in that timeline, which further led the entity to recognize that it was in a way imbalanced into this timeline, which furthermore led the entity to also recognize heightened levels of clarity and vibrational alignment. Furthermore, after the entity realized that desires caused it to suffer a lot, it felt the need to let go of such desires. Eventually, it crossed over at the age of around 75 years in the time, and then, prior to this, it was found in the lands of Agartha, also known as the Inner Earth, wherein it was found that a space-time of spending around 5 incarnational cycles in the time. Furthermore, prior to this, it was found in the location of the planet of Mars at a space-time of 204 million years ago, wherein it was known by the name of Aram, which meant the awakened one in the time. Furthermore, we as the higher self of the entity are always guiding it, and we shall now leave you, beloveds, in light and love of the one Creator. Go forth, rejoicing in power and peace.